Right, we'll run through the main bits of info you need to know on each bank and also where the opportunities are on each of them. So Bank of England, first up. What's the main things you need to know? There are 9 members of the Bank of England MPC committee. So these are the people who make the decisions, and they make the decisions via a vote. So that becomes extremely important and becomes a trading opportunity. Their target is 2% inflation. Now this is symmetrical, which means it can go above and it can go below, either of which can produce some kind of policy shift. So they're the 2 main things you really need to know about the Bank of England. In terms of where the opportunities come or the way they structure their policies, you get the QIR, which comes every quarter. And this brings with it also a press conference with Q&A. Presser, Q&A and forecasts. So generally you get a little bit more information on the QIR than you do on any of the other meetings or the other 4 meetings. So where's your opportunities? You get a screen dump with the Bank of England. This comes at midday. And the good thing with this is it's reasonably clean cut in the way it displays the data and also the priority in that as well. So first up you get the rate, you then get the vote, you then get guidance, and then on every other you get the forecasts. And you can pretty much trade the Bank of England in terms of priority following the order that things come out. First up, obviously, the rate, and that is what's going to make the biggest difference. The vote, though, if the rate is as expected, then starts giving you clues, and that's the key thing from the vote. You get a clue. Are they starting to shift towards more hawkish or more dovish stance? Now, when it comes down to the language, the Bank of England really focuses on 3 areas. They have their main guidance, and their main guidance is that any rate increases will be gradual and limited. So that's their main guidance. However, the other areas that you get information on are on inflation, on stimulus, and on pricing. The Bank of England often on pricing will talk about how the market has got it, and so is the market right or is it wrong? So again, you get reasonably clean cut trading opportunities on these. The Bank of England could say that the market has overpriced a rate hike, or that the market is pricing in more or less rate hikes than should be expected. On inflation, this generally revolves around tolerance. And on stimulus, it's about whether they are willing to withdraw or maintain. So they're the focal areas for language. Remember the table as well. Get these noted down so you can see the progression over time. And that way, that starts to help you out in having a sense of what is likely to happen at the subsequent meetings. Moving on to the ECB. Now the ECB is somewhat different to the Bank of England in their mandate is only focused on inflation. And also that is inflation at close to but below 2%. Unlike other central banks that are willing to see it above and below, ECB is all about close to or below 2%. Now what you get from the ECB is you get 2 opportunities per month. You get the 12:45 and 1:30. So you get a screen dump, and you also then get the statement and press conference at every meeting. with Q&A. So this perhaps is the central bank with the most opportunities or the most likelihood of change. However, historically, they've only been changing when you get the staff economic projections. So these come again quarterly. So they come in March, June, Sep, and Dec. So that's likely the time where you get change from the from the ECB. However, it's the interim meetings where you often get the most opportunities. Now this comes in their form of guidance. Now the ECB has very clear phrases regarding rates in that they will remain at present levels beyond the horizon for asset purchases, and that the asset purchases will run at a certain amount until a certain date. So still with the ECB, they still have in place at time of speaking QE and negative rates. They have generally been the slower to react and follow many of the other central banks in how they've done it as well. So you could have some clues from other central banks here. Now, in terms of guidance from the ECB, it's very much about keywords in their statements, and also the statement structure. So a statement in the press conference that starts off away from the standard structure, so make sure you read the statements. Anything that goes off the standard structure is almost always indicating change. And then it's a case of what exactly they've done. Now, the change is often already quite well known. The ECB on the non-quarterlies, so the ones outside of this bracket, will often then give the market a clue with the use of certain phrases, evaluating, analysis, and reassessment. They use any of these phrases, generally it indicates that you then have the next meeting a change. So that's a change coming. And this is where with the ECB, being aware of where exactly they're moving and which direction, it's quite easy to then take this phrasing on evaluating, analysis and reassess to mean that a change is coming at the next meeting, and you know the direction that that change is coming. Now, the other big opportunity you get from the ECB is sources. You consistently get unnamed sources outside of ECB meetings that give a sense of where the ECB is thinking that it's going. It will then enable you to have not only a chance of a trade in between meetings, and this is a trade that comes, as you can see on this example, at random times of the day. So not everyone is quite as aware of it, so this provides a completely different trade. However, the sources also then provide you a trade in that they may or may not be true. And there then becomes a trade on that as well. So your opportunities on the ECB, keywords particularly relating to policy and also inflation. That's the main focus, policy and inflation. Followed by that, you've then got the structure of the statement, the way this starts off, and then the use of keywords, evaluate, analysis, reassess. This tells you that change is coming. Finally, you've got sources as well, which give you opportunities in between meetings. So moving on to the Fed. Now the Fed is generally the most aggressive and quickest to act. So the Fed has already done QE and come out of it. They've already started raising rates. So the Fed leads the way and often provides a lot of format structure to how other central banks may well follow on. So provide a template. With the Fed, again, you get 4 meetings with a press conference and forecasts. These also include, crucially, the dots. And this has often been the biggest tool in guiding the market on where exactly the opportunities are. So I've got a nice example of dots down here. This is how they actually come out. It gives you a median view of where rates are expected to be at certain periods down the line. This way the Fed can guide the market without use of explicit phrasing. The Fed does, however, have guidance in terms of rates, and that rate moves will be gradual. Again, sticking with the Bank of England, or the Bank of England actually adopted the Fed's phrasing here. Key areas outside of the dots that you want to be looking at. The Fed will use reference to 12-month inflation. Risks to the outlook. Monetary policy stance. This is crucial. So how do they phrase this monetary policy stance? Through the beginning of the rate hiking phase from 2015, the stance has been described as accommodative. But how they then continue to describe it will give a sense of how likely the Fed is to continue raising rates, or whether they are then into a phase of staying still on rates, and that they are now at the neutral rate for inflation. That neutral rate is crucial as well. The Fed has a big focus on the Phillips curve. So make sure you understand what the Phillips curve is. It's the relationship between inflation and unemployment in the short term. One final thing, you get Fed minutes, and the minutes come 3 weeks after the meeting. Within the minutes, you get a use of various phrases, so watch out for the specific qualifiers, and this explains the severity of how people are voting for certain things. The Fed typically uses the words few, several, many, and all/generally. This is how the Fed then gives you a sense of where they view things going forward, and it's a chance then to also indicate to the market whether it was right or wrong at the last meeting by putting in certain elements into these minutes. So that's where your opportunities really come on the Fed. It is often a case of once you get the rate, the dots then become the main thing. So you get a rate movement, and perhaps you get quick move up on rates unchanged, followed by a very quick drop back down. And when I say quick, this is a matter of seconds. You get a quick move, and then the possibility to fade that move on the dots. So make sure you're thinking about the relationship between the two and the order in which those come out. Now finally, on to the Bank of Canada. Now Bank of Canada is perhaps the quietest of the central banks that we look at. What you do not get from the Bank of Canada is any guidance. Unlike the other central banks that give some form of guidance, even if they're not explicit on what exactly it is. You get no guidance from the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada has also been very reticent to actually do anything on rates. So they've had no QE. Instead, just a verbal commitment. So Bank of Canada works on potential rather than action, or so far at least has. You also get very limited talk between meetings as well from the Bank of Canada. So your opportunities really do all come down to the screen dump. That's where your focal point is. On that screen dump, that's where you get all the information. You do every 4 meetings of the year get a press conference with staff economic projections. However, all the focus generally is on the screen dump. Now, the Bank of Canada is quite influenced by oil prices, so that can help give you a gauge as to whether rates may or may not be in play to move, and they're perhaps influenced in this to a greater extent than any of the other central banks. Now, they also, like the Bank of England, have some reasonably consistent phrases or areas of discussion. So these focal points. And these focal points of the Bank of Canada come around their outlook. And this is for Canada and global. That they can use as a reason to change rates. Beyond that, they also frequently reference excess capacity and labour market slack, giving you a clue as to how they're seeing inflation moving. Beyond that, they do also reference inflation as well. So remember to keep an eye on that table, keep an eye on how they talk about each of these areas. That way you again get a sense of how things are building. Now, the Bank of Canada's statements are inconsistent. A lot like the Bank of England, they don't have a consistent statement format. So it is again so much down onto this screen dump. Bank of Canada also is data dependent. Like most of the other central banks, but this then brings into focus certain CPI and unemployment rates in Canada, which can then start having quite a decent impact on rates. Bank of Canada is not scared to change mid or in between press conferences, so no presser, and they will still change. So every meeting is live, whereas what we've seen so far from the Fed and the ECB is generally that without a press conference there is unlikely to be a change, so they are not live, whereas the Bank of Canada, they are live at every meeting, and that provides great opportunity. So that's your central bank's quick wrap up, the areas that you need to be looking at. Make sure you track their references to data points, to how they see the economy evolving, to how they see rates evolving. Understand those keywords, break them down into a table. That way you can track, and also that way you can prepare yourself so much better for any of these events. All right.